Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Rogue Calvinist Radio. I appreciate everyone tuning in. Today, we are going to be discussing a topic that we haven't touched on in at least a month, maybe a little more than that. We're going to be talking about open theism in general today, though we have a specific video from Theology that we're going to touch on just briefly, where he describes the origins of Reformed theology as evil. So we're going to definitely approach at least some of his argument, but we're going to quickly move on from there about some wider doctrinal issues within open theism itself. Oh, and I forgot to say this, though I think I said it on the thumbnail. We have a special guest with us today, Israel Trujillo, and that is the name of his channel also. So a good Reformed brother. He's on today with us because he has some insightful arguments to give concerning open theism. So we're going to let him explain those to us a little bit later. Let's take a look at the chat and see who all we have here right now. Israel, good to have you for the first time on the channel.
Oh, pleasure, man. It's a pleasure being here. And I'm very glad we're on the same side, fighting the good battle, because I think we got a lot of Calvinists online that are not giving pushback to the anti-Calvinists out there. So they're getting away with saying whatever they want, even if it's dishonest, even if it's total nonsense, even if they don't address actual scholarship on capitalism, on metaphysics. We're seeing lower tier stuff just pushed thoroughly, very, without much care for actually representing the other side properly. So, that's just been a very big pet peeve. So I decided to come back to the English scene. I've been to Spanish mostly for the last few years, not consistently, but mostly in the Spanish scene, and also like away with also like dominating youth, if you want, a little bit. So I came back over here to give some push to these two groups, to the anti-Calvinists and to Catholics. That's mostly the content I'll be streaming, and we're doing debates pretty soon. Just trying to grow the channel a little bit more, and after that, should be making more of that content. But man, very glad to be here. Very glad to be here with you, brother. And we'll show some of the foolishness of the open theism and of the anti-Calvin here, man.
Okay, great. And hey, in the chat, guys, tell me if you can hear Israel okay. I seemed to be having some difficulties hearing you with cutting out just a little bit here and there. But did I pronounce your last name correctly?
It's Trujillo. It's
Okay.
it's in Spanish, Trujillo, but now don't worry,
Silent
man.
J.
Like I always get it butchered everywhere, so it's all good, man. Is Calvinist your last name, brother? I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Did I pronounce it right?
Right. Yeah. No silent letters.
First name Rogue.
Right. Okay. They said you were cutting in and out, but it seems to be a little bit better now than it was when you were speaking, because before I couldn't see you moving on the video, but now I see you moving in real time on the video.
Gotcha.
So I think we should be good. Sorry about that, guys. He was just explaining kind of what his motivation is for going against open theism. It's the idea, I guess, that they just get on here and say whatever they want, whether it's true or not, whether they're actually dealing with arguments or historical arguments, modern arguments, or any of it for that matter. But at any rate, let's go ahead and check out this so-called, at least a little bit of it, villainous origin story. We'll probably just sit here and let him talk for a little bit, and then we'll just kind of briefly discuss what he's saying. Israel, you make sure to let me know that you can hear the video when we start.
Yeah, sounds good, man.
People frequently ask me why I hate Calvinism so much, and you will understand why in the next 26 seconds.
Hey, at least he doesn't, at least he's not trying to pretend that he doesn't hate Reformed theology, so we know where he stands on that.
God works all things after the counsel of his will, even keeping those kings who want to commit adultery from committing so. And when he wants to, he orders those to commit adultery when he wants to.
If this does not make your blood boil, then you are a Christian who is okay with the open slander of your heavenly Father. How did it get to such a point where supposedly Christian preachers are unabashedly blaming God for the most heinous sins? Today we will be diving into that, studying the heinous and villainous origin story of Calvinism. To understand, we have to go back to the man himself, John Calvin. He was born in France in 1509, and he would populate the theology that would go on to be named after him, the all too familiar Calvinism. Calvinists have been known to view themselves as elite Christians who really understand the Bible. They often look down on us more simple-minded Christians who think dumb things like God loves everybody, or God doesn't order people to rape each other or commit adultery, right? You know, dumb stuff like that.
I don't make mistakes. I'm not just like the rest of you. I'm stronger. I'm smarter. I'm better. I am better.
The namesake of Calvinism, John Calvin, he very nicely embodies the Calvinistic spirit. As a Christian leader, he is hardly a man who I would consider to be a godly.
Let's everybody just chill out for a second, first of all. Israel, let me ask you a question, buddy. Do you feel like that's a good description of you? Do you feel like you are an elite Christian who is better than all other Christians? Is that true of you?
No, absolutely not. And I think the what the main issue of where they get this this idea that Calvinists are jerks, so that we have pretty much a jerk mentality or a jerk personality that just goes about because of Calvinism specifically. I think it relates a little bit more to ecclesiology, and they confuse being a little bit more worried about gatekeeping the church, about keeping the church clean out of heresy, out of dramas, out of this kind of stuff than they do. Because when we see someone like, let's say, I want to mention this. It's Michael Brown, like Dr. Michael Brown. Like, you know, he's a great guy. He's a great theologian. But if you see like the type of people he hangs out with in that association he's in, he's with Kenneth Copeland, with some of these false teachers, etc. But when you see some of what the Calvinist controversies, for example, like with Stephen Lawson, you see that he was disciplined right away. So we tend to have a little bit of a higher view of church discipline. The elder seems to be a little bit more involved, and that's also because we have multiple elders. And since we have a multiplicity of elders, while one elder can focus on one area of the church, the other elders can focus on other areas. So we tend to have a church that it's more that is more into listening to the issues that are going in the church, knowing what the members believe, and correcting them if needed. And if there's some disagreeableness, because you know, we tend to be more disagreeable because we are in a very disagreeable environment, because we got to practice church discipline. We pretty much we give him an opportunity to repent. We teach him the right way, and if there's no repentance, that's when church discipline happens. When the person must live for a bit, or must stay silent in church, or some other measure, or must go through some courses to fix up like some theological issue, or let's say if the person refuses to, let's say a one member scams another one, or not pays a debt or something like that. And let's say the church tells them like, hey, you should pay your stuff. Yeah, and the person doesn't do it. That's when church discipline happens. So we apply church discipline um, in our churches a little bit more than it happens in evangelical churches. And as I was saying, it's mostly because we have a multiplicity of elders, and we have very extensive bylaws. So when you go to to see the statement of faith of a non-Calvinist church, you're gonna see that their bylaws are actually like pretty small. Like they don't have that much content in it, so they are not prepared for situations. So they got to pretty much improvise, not just when it comes to doctrine, but improvise when it comes to how to how to rule a church. And when it comes to our churches, I mean, we have sometimes bylaws that are like an inch or two of thickness, of all the content we have, and all the instances of things that can go wrong within a church. So yeah, we tend to be more disagreeable. We tend to be more challenging within our own churches. We tend to have checks and balances between elders. So yeah, it's an environment of more of a constant disagreements or pushback or checks and balances, and that I
Okay.
think that makes us seem a little bit more. I don't want to say jerks, but to give pushback online too. So when we're streaming, when we're putting content online, when we're talking about other traditions, etc. I think this ecclesiological background kind of like comes out too. Yeah, because why? Because
Yeah.
we try to keep the church clean. We try to keep our church free of heresy. We try to keep it free of dramas, or we address the dramas. We address stuff, and I would say that this is confused as being a jerk. That's why I think like he gets kind of like this idea, in my opinion, in my humble opinion.
Yeah. Well. Okay. I appreciate that. And I definitely see myself as an elite level Christian. Like I am an epic level 30 theologian with no competitors. I'm just I'm just joking. I'm just playing into his thing here. Like that. That's a ridiculous statement. It really is. Like I've never heard any Calvinist claim to be elite in any way. I think maybe he's I think maybe he's reading a little bit more into the term elect than is necessary on that point. Well, I want to ask you something though, because he just played this clip from this apparently Calvinistic preacher,
Hmm.
and I would argue that the message that was just at least briefly mentioned, because we didn't really get to hear the guy in context, but from what I can tell from what he said, this guy is representing hyper-Calvinism, the guy who says that God orders someone to
Hmm.
commit adultery, right? Because
Yeah,
that
that.
is definitely not a reformed position. God
Yeah,
does
no,
not.
he's that's why I was telling you to pause the video on there, because I was like, yeah, no, he took like the worst example he ever could possibly taken. Like it seems like that guy is not addressing compatibilism at all, cannot understand the distinction between coercion and more of a passive decree. And yeah, so he says that that God is ordering for it to happen, but what ordering implies,
Yeah.
it implies someone that is a sender of a message, and then the person receiving it, and then there being a message, and then such a thing. also possibly happening. And yeah, that's not what we see. When we see in scripture, we're not going to see stuff like, hey, you must rape this person over here. Like, we're not going to see
Right.
any of that. So he's totally totally misrepresenting the language that we use. Why? Because in our metaphysics, so we are our own unique bundle um, of propositions. Like, each person is a bundle of propositions, a bundle of minds, of thoughts, of a bundle of data, of information, and all this information is unique. The same way that that the number two is not the same as the number four. So in this reality, depending on your metaphysics, whether you're an idealist, dualist, whatever, each person in and of itself, it's a dissociation. It has its own data, its own numbers, and that makes it unique. And if it's unique, whenever there's a referent communicating to another referent within reality, in this case, God and men, they will have a different set of information. They're their own unique thing. So one cannot just collapse all sorts of language however one pleases. Like, one has to respect the fact that there's a distinction between our language and the I'm sorry, not our language, our sets of information of what we are, of what we think, of our bundle of thoughts,
Yeah.
than the ones of God. So it must be distinct, and in your language, it must be distinct too. So he's totally failing to address any metaphysically, like why he gets someone that doesn't know metaphysics, and he not knowing metaphysics either, and trying to represent all of us as this hyper-Calvinist. So it's just
Yeah.
dishonest, and I'm sure he knows better Calvinists. I'm sure he does.
Oh yeah. I mean, they're all over the interwebs. But I want the listeners to know, especially the open theists or slash provisionists in the crowd, that we're not just calling this guy a hyper Calvinist arbitrarily because we don't like what he's saying. The definition of hyper Calvinism is a person who would hold to a positive schema of double predestination. And we've talked about that before on this program, but just as for a brief refresher, the difference between the hyper Calvinistic position and the Reformed position on this matter is that the hyper Calvinist would say exactly what this man has said, that God has ordered this to take place in real time. Like, God is pulling the string of it. Like, God is actively using his power to cause that sin to take place right now, where if he was not actively causing it, it would not take place. That's a hyper Calvinistic position. That is not the position of the reformers. The position of the reformers is that God does actively work faith into the heart of his elect, leading them to salvation. But he does not have to actively work evil in the heart of everyone else, because the evil is already in your heart. The evil sin begins in your heart and expresses itself from there. And so when someone commits adultery, their heart conceived of that thing. And yes, their adultery was ordained before the foundation of the world by God, was decreed to take place in the exact manner that it took place. However, God is not a Hebraic megazeus. God does not inhabit our reality. He doesn't inhabit the material realm that we live in. He inhabits eternity. His decree is outside of time, and it doesn't require any action on his part for his decree to take place. There are creatures who are acting out their own natures and fulfilling God's decree of their own motivation by accident, right? They don't know that it's God's decree for these things to take place. Their motivation from their heart is causing them to do this thing, which was ordained by God, but it's still their motivation. It's their idea to do the thing. And for just real quick, for the best way to look at that biblically, to see how that can be the case, and in what way does God reside outside of our realm, our reality. Psalm 139:16, where God describes himself as having a book in which he has established all of our days before they were ever any of it. And so, from that analogy, we can view God as like an author of a book, where we are the characters in the book who are acting freely, right? We're we're using our volition. It's just that the Bible says our volitions are enslaved to sin until such a time as we are set free by Christ. So I just want to clear that up, because as usual, what you have is a guy like in Yart Theology taking something that no actual Reformed person believes and putting it out there like that is what we believe. And that has been the pattern of what Calvinists have had to deal with ever since the Institutes, before that. I mean, the point of Calvin writing the Institutes was to clear up lies about what we were teaching. So there's that. We continue to deal with that same thing as the years go. Now, I want to briefly also touch on the alleged villainous, evil nature of John Calvin. Um, there are a lot of things, a lot of thoughts, and a lot of practices of John Calvin that I would agree are evil, that I would agree are immoral. I want to make it very clear that Calvinism does not begin with John Calvin. That is a name attached to the theology from the Roman Catholic Church. There was a large debate that took place between John Calvin and Jacobus Arminius. They heralded the two Protestant positions that were fighting at that time, and so their names got attached to the two positions, and that's all there is to it. The Calvinistic doctrines do not begin with John Calvin. They begin far before that, but in as far as the Reformation goes, they don't even begin with Luther. And I don't remember the guy's name, but Luther first stumbled across these concepts in someone else's writing who came before him and got killed before he could make any headway with it. Right? He was executed, and then Luther came across some of his writings that were kind of hidden away in their library. Maybe they forgot to get rid of it, I think. I can't remember the exact story, but it's something like that. Anyway, as far as the Reformation goes, this is the theology that brought us out of Roman Catholicism. It doesn't begin with John Calvin. It begins with the scripture.
And I want to add something. Like it's just not that it was Calvinism against something absolutely totally foreign in Roman Catholicism. Because when you see the history of Roman Catholicism, like they would have an idea of predestination, and not just that. Like even someone like Christian Wagner, which is a Catholic apologist, usually on a much higher tier than most Catholic apologists online, he would even argue that there was even like some idea of double predestination in Thomas Aquinas, and he's a doctor of the church, and they take his writings pretty much as authoritative in a sense. So yeah, that was present there. And when you see also the Jesuits would have this sort of Thomistic, either Molinistic or Thomistic idea of predestination, and they would have like a very similar case to what we were arguing. So and why were they doing that? Why? Because Augustine had an influence for over 1,000 years. So if that was the mainstream theology, and I'm not saying Calvinism specifically and everything that we know from the Confessions and from John Calvin himself, but some of the basics of predestination and God's sovereignly acting over humanity in a sort of compatibilistic way. I'm not saying they're necessarily compatibilist, but it's very, very similar. You see this theology very like resembling the history of the church for at least 1,000 years. So I mean, it's not like it's too foreign. But even if Calvin was evil, I mean, the reformers, like you can find a lot of articles just with a little Google search or a YouTube search, you can find a million things that that Martin Luther did wrong, like some call for a massacre that over here Joe Hitchmeyer it's pretty much arguing, one of the Catholic apologists online. And yeah, they say stuff like that. And also we know that the reformers, some of them went into wars, sometimes with Rome, sometimes against each other. So it was a something spread out around the whole era of Christendom. It was not just exclusively of John Calvin. So well, we
Right.
got to take into account his times. It's like the same way that if you're reading Judges or you're reading a story of David, it's gonna be brutal. It's gonna be very, very brutal. You see the family of David with Absalom, with Tamar and the brother that raped his own sister, and how they went to war and how Absalom went to war with his own father and that kind of stuff. I mean, that kind of stuff I don't see it happening much today. So what's happening here, like, it's a more barbaric time. The church is evolving. It's learning from its history, from its mistakes. We're advancing in society. And so yeah, we got to take into account which times we are living in, and how
Right.
that is like broadcast to the whole society. So he's trying to just contrast John Calvin to our society. So
Right.
that's utterly dishonest from our friend from NER Theology. Why is he doing this? Why is he being
Yeah.
dishonest?
Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of, well, the thing is too that you have to appreciate where they're coming out of. You have to appreciate that they're coming directly out of Rome. You have to, who there's going to be stuff that lingers from the culture of Rome in the individuals who reform from Rome, because they may or may not have realized the need for reform in certain areas. We know the areas that they saw the need for reform in as far as the gospel is concerned, but they needed more time to get away from that stuff. And just by the way, one of the messages of Christianity is that everyone is evil. And so this is just kind of like a red herring. It's kind of it's a it's a shiny coin that you flip up in the air while you do something else, because I'm evil. I mean, when a Christian tries to harp on an idea like this, they're not taking into consideration their own sin and the fact that they are evil while making these claims. That's one of the most foundational claims of Christianity, that all men are under sin. All of them. All of them begin life with a wicked heart. Paul even explains in Romans chapter 7 of how his sinful nature has stayed with him, in the sense of sin still resides within his flesh. There's nothing good that lives in his flesh. That he wants to do good, but his body cannot figure out how to do it. And there is a constant war in the Christian life to go from where your flesh, which is still inundated with sin, is warring against the law of your mind, which agrees with the law of God that it's good. And so with the mind, you serve God, but with the body, unfortunately, you serve the law of sin. Oh, wretched man that I am, who will save me from the body of this death, right? And so, first of all, we have to recognize that every last one of us are evil. Now, as far as your actions, again, we got to take into consideration where they were coming out of. But all of it's irrelevant anyway. It's completely irrelevant because what matters? What matters is, what does the scripture say on these topics? And that's the origin of Reformed theology, is, the idea that we are justified through faith, and that faith is not a choice that you make. Faith is the evidence of the things that you hope for in the gospel. It's a gift from God. And all of the other doctrines of Reformed theology, you guys know that we have scripture to back every one of them up. And so whatever is evil about John Calvin is absolutely, completely, 100% irrelevant to our conversation. And what we're going to do here, we're going to let him get through a few more minutes of his video here before we start talking about open theism more broadly. I just want to see what other kind of arguments he presents here, if anything.
Leader, he was a cold-hearted and harsh man wielding both theological and political power. Calvin was controlling to the point of making attendance to his church mandatory. He fought for control of Geneva, Switzerland, where he treated those who disagreed with his theology extremely harshly. Calvin reportedly gave 3 prison sentences to people who laughed during church. He flogged a man who protested his predestination theology, and most notably, he murdered someone who he considered to be a monster for his heretical beliefs. The man.
Now, what you're supposed to be doing, if you are a follower of in-yard theology, is you are supposed to be absorbing this emotional presentation, and because you became emotionally invested in what he's saying, now you just believe everything else that he says, right? That's what they do. They manipulate your emotions and do a bait and switch on you, right? Okay.
Oh, and the worst thing is they don't even do it right. Like they have to generalize to make sure that that it's all of Calvinism, or that Calvinism in general has an effect psychologically on people. That's why he was linking the idea that, that Calvinists are jerks, to these evils right here that John Calvin was doing. So he's got to generalize. So he doesn't even do it right. And the worst thing is that we can do the same thing, and I've done it already with some of the non-Calvinist streamers out there. Yeah, you guys know it. I know this audience knows them. And so, for example, I've used this argument where, how is their God, like, for trying to say that we are born innocent, that we're not born with total depravity? Well, it backfires to them, because if God, during the flood, during the firstborn of Egypt, or the baby of David, in other instances where there's infants that die, if they die and they were innocent, that would make God, by definition, a murderer. So we can turn it back against them. And if their God, it's killing someone innocent, they by definition become a murderer. And when you see some of the responses that they give, there's nowhere to hide in academia. Like, even even scholars
Right.
give like terrible answers, and they try to avoid this question as much as possible. They say stuff like, "Oh no, well, there will be a reward in heaven." Well, I mean, if if that's an explanation, then I guess you can go commit a rape, and as long as you get him a lifetime pass to Disneyland, I guess that makes it okay. And that's kind of like the reasoning that these people do. And they
Right.
they don't have an answer for this. There's nowhere to have in academia. Like they have that answer and other answers, but they'll work around the same thing. They say that, oh no, God can do it. Well, I mean, you're being ad hoc. I thought we couldn't be ad hoc because that's one of the accusations that we get about Calvinism, that we just say, oh, for his glory we're being ad hoc. So why are you being ad hoc? And I don't stop there. So they're generalizing again. I don't just stop in for his glory. I give the intuitive means on which an action can be moral, but they do stop being ad hoc in this question. So yeah, this guy is not consistent, and we can use emotionally charged imagery and and analogies, like, to actually make our point too. So I mean, if they want to play that game, I've been waiting for an opponent to debate me on whether Calvinism is morally intuitive. I've been waiting for a while. I've been asked multiple people, including Warren McGrew, and I don't have an opponent yet. So I'm still waiting. I'm still waiting.
Yeah, and the whole conversation reminds me of what Paul said in Romans chapter 3. Clearly, he's dealing with people saying similar things to him when he says, why not say, let us do evil that good may come, as we are slanderously reported, and as some affirm that we say. And that's Paul is almost responding to that same kind of idea here. The idea that, oh, okay, why don't we just go out and commit some kind of serious crime because God's glory is going to come from it, right?
Yeah.
And that's definitely not what we say. But let's let him continue a little further here.
Was tied down and burned alive as a punishment. While Calvin himself wasn't the one to light the flame, he certainly took credit for his death, and he even wrote that history should remember and thank him for killing such a monster. Perhaps Calvinists will defend Calvin by saying he wasn't the one to start the flame. With that said, I still think if Calvin takes credit for him, I don't hesitate to place blame. The monster in question was a heretic named Michael Servetus. Servetus was a Unitarian who denied that Jesus was God. This is certainly a heresy with very dire consequences, but not one that warrants being burned alive. When a self-professed Christian starts believing something we consider heretical or unbiblical, we should follow Jesus' command and love our enemies, not burn them to death for their disagreement. Just think about it logically for a second. If you believe...
Right, because that's what all Reformed teachers are advocating for today, right? The burning of anyone who doesn't believe our position. Is there literally even one Reformed teacher who says that? Even one?
Oh, hey, and I want to add that he's actually a hypocrite, because if you notice, most open theists and all the anti-Calvinists online, I haven't seen a single one of them that does not hang out with Roman Catholics. Like, they do hang out with Roman Catholics. And if we're talking about Roman Catholicism today, not during the Reformation, if we're talking about Roman Catholicism today, I mean, we do know, as a matter of fact, that the Pope takes some people accused of pedophilia, and he hides them in other dioceses in different countries and in places where they cannot be reached. We also know that they intentionally fill their seminaries with homosexuality, and they do this. Why? Because I mean, they want to practice their stuff without being bothered, and they want more people to do it. And even Pope Francis himself says that their seminaries, their monasteries, are full of homosexuality. So in that area, oh, and also Tucho Fernandez, their chief of doctrine, it's a blasphemer. Like, he believes that the Holy Spirit experience is orgasmic, and he fantasizes about Jesus touching him. And this is in his book. In one of the books he wrote, he tried to hide it before becoming the chief of doctrine, but he has not repented. And actually, he and Francis laughed about his book. He would say that he was a defenseless little girl being touched by Jesus. So these guys are perverts, and Pope Francis it's actually supporting that kind of stuff. And we can go even further on some people being at least 9 confirmed Satanists within the Vatican, among other stuff. So we know they're doing perverse things. They're actually
Well,
they're
I would think
promoting
that
LGBT stuff.
I need to push back
Go
just a
ahead. Go ahead.
little bit, on that, and just say that our
Okay.
friends, the provisionists and the open theists, for us to really hit them with that kind of stuff, we would have to expect them to be more consistent with themselves, and we know that they're not. And so they wouldn't consistently hold to, like, any of those things that you just mentioned that the Roman Catholic
Oh
Church is
yeah, yeah. No, I
involved
know, I know, I know. I'm not saying
in.
they hold to any of this. So this is why they're inconsistent, because they don't. They hate
Right.
this. If it was a Protestant, they would break communion right away. But because it's they all just promote, like, oh no, let's have Roman Catholics as Christians and have fellowship with them, blah blah blah, and collaborate with them against Calvinists, because they
Yeah.
get together against Calvinists too.
It seems like
Because of this, like they end up being inconsistent, because he's calling out the evils of John Calvin and pretty much like kind of like to trash our tradition, but they don't do anything about Roman Catholicism, either because of ignorance or because it's just whatever's trending right now. It's they're all doing it. They're all communing with Rome, so let's do that too. That kind
right.
of stuff. So he's being inconsistent. That's what I mean.
And at the beginning of the video here, he kind of pointed out for himself where the differences. Why isn't he making a video about how many people the Roman Catholic Church murdered that didn't believe their theology? The reason is why he said in the beginning of the video, I hate Calvinism, right? And so he's using this emotional argument against Calvinists for the sole reason of he hates Calvinists. So, and so the argument is coming from a place of hate. We already know that. He said that himself,
Yep.
right? And these guys have no problem being in league with anyone as long as they will affirm that if Calvinism is true, God is evil, and that includes atheists. And maybe they don't chill and talk with atheists, but I have heard Leighton Flowers say that how much he appreciates the atheistic arguments against Calvinism, and which is
Oh,
just one of the saddest things I've ever heard.
there's something ironic on that, because like those atheists that argue against Calvinism are usually atheists that are not aware of the literature on free will. Like they have this in common, that most of them, like they truly suck when it comes to the compatibilist literature. But when you see the scholars on compatibilism, like the actual atheist scholars, that most of them are compatibilists. So actually, and if you see the consensus of philosophy of religion, we know that that seculars, including atheists and agnostics, they compose about a 60% of scholars in philosophy of religion. So Christians are a minority, and this majority, the 60%, most of them are compatibilists. So yeah, why are they using atheists? Atheists are going to agree with the Calvinists when it comes. They're going to use the same literature on Frankfurt style cases to argue the moral responsibility and indeterminism. So why is he saying this? Oh, and also Leighton. I don't think Leighton is aware of any of this, because he intentionally avoids scholars. Like when he debated Guillaume Vignon, he did it along with Braxton Hunter and Tim Stratton, like three of them against one Calvinist, and still Dr. Vignon, he did great on that chat, but he later would never dare debate Vignon by himself, because he's not a philosopher. He is terrible in philosophy. Leighton is just absolutely horrible, and both me and Colton Carlson have been challenging him to show up for a debate, and he doesn't do that. I even traveled twice to debate him, and there's been a few excuses. Whether it's justified or not, that's another question. One of them was justifiable. He was sick, but I don't think they're consistent, and they don't even know what's happening in academia. If they try to side with atheists, they're not on their side. They're not on their side.
Okay. Well, just to clear a few things up here, I get I get accused of spreading hate myself. Um, for instance, here in the chat, I'm being accused of spreading hate, and first of all, I don't see any objective support coming with that. But second of all, I just want to play this one more time, just this opening line. Listen to this.
People frequently ask me why I hate Calvinism.
People frequently ask me why I hate Calvinism. Let's see if he's about to deny. Is he going to deny that he hates Calvinism? Let's see.
So much, and you will understand why in the next 26 seconds.
Okay, so his argument is admittedly coming from a place of hate. Not only is it admittedly coming from a place of hate, but he's going to explain to you why in this video so that you too can have an argument from a place of hate. All right, in your theology. You see, it's easy to just say that someone is spreading hate, right? It's easy. Easy. You can just open your mouth and say it. But this guy is saying it of himself. And I don't hate anyone. So
Second, if you believe that someone is a heretic and they're going to hell for their heretical beliefs, and you're a Christian who supposedly wants him to go to heaven, if you kill him, right, while he still believes that heresy, you are guaranteeing that he goes to hell, right?
yeah, I mean, like I wouldn't disagree with that at all. I definitely 100% agree with that. Definitely no one should be killed for a theological position.
Mm-hmm.
And and it's like,
Oh,
it's like we're pretending that that Calvinists never helped form America, and that we don't have very specific laws against that kind of thing, and that the church doesn't affirm that today. Like we're just gonna pretend that that's what Calvinists want. Just want to burn
yeah.
people who
Although
don't agree.
there's a big issue here on his side. What does he do with the Old Testament, with all those wars that were not just commanded by God, but that the Israelites themselves participated on and took into account. And if we say, for example, like that in all instances we shouldn't take a life. I mean, what do we do with cops? What do we do with wars? What do we do with Hitler? Like, should Christians in the World War II, should have fought against Hitler and let more millions and millions and millions of Jews die? Well, we know at least even trying, like 6 million Jews died, and now imagine like if we wouldn't have tried, like it would have been a bloodbath, where an even bigger bloodbath if would have let that just kept going. So the way he doesn't specify on civil moral instances, and even in civil moral instances, there's the death penalty. Even in moral instances, there's the idea of whether cops can do it. The idea is of whether you can do it on self-defense to protect, let's say, your family from a rapist or that kind of stuff. So
I don't think
think he's.
I don't think anyone would support it coming from a theological position, though. I think.
Oh yeah,
there are
I understand.
various reasons in the law of God itself to kill someone for various sin, but well, I guess in the Old Testament you got death for blasphemy. Right?
Yeah, but what about the theological position of Islam, of them, wanting to utterly destroy Israel? Should the country of Israel defend themselves against Islam, against Muslims? And I mean, if they don't, there's not going to be an Israel anymore. They're going to be wiped out, and that's a theological position. And Muslims do have a theological position on annihilating Israel.
Yeah, well, if the theological position involves crime of that nature, I would say That's a little different.
Mhm.
But at the
Oh yeah.
same time,
Mhm.
it would have to involve a situation like where they're performing terrorist activities. But then again, that's not even necessarily not even necessarily on Islam that's taking place. There's different
Yeah, it's
sects
some
of
Muslims, yeah, the
yeah.
Shias and the more extreme Shias, if you want to call it that, in their minority. So yeah, sure, I agree on that. So in a civil matter, in a context where there's no war, and it's just someone spewing heresy, yeah, we actually see the command in the Bible that it's about excommunication. So when we see the old commandments, it will be to stoning someone to death for being a blasphemer or a false prophet. Nowadays it's just excommunicating, and we see these explicitly as a command. um yeah, just to not have fellowship with them anymore, to not be nice with them anymore, to not eat together, that kind of stuff, and to not have them in your church or lay hands on anyone, or not even pray with them when outside of church. So yeah, we see these standards. That's what we're supposed to do, and that's what Paul argues pretty much.
So let's move away. Let's move away from this emotional argument about the origins of Calvinism. It's guys, if you have any questions about the origin of Calvinism, just let's go strolling through some of my videos. We'll talk about the scriptural origins of Reformed theology anytime that you want. But for right now, because this guy is an open theist, I do want to deal with some general open theist stuff. And when I was talking to Israel here a few days ago about wanting to do this stream, he had mentioned, or Israel, you mentioned that you had tested a few arguments
Hmm.
against open theist
Yes, sir.
apologists. And so just kind of of your first argument, kind of give me a brief introduction to it, kind of what does it argue against and what is it arguing
Sure.
for? Go ahead.
Sure. So it's just a quick rebuttal, but yeah. So the claim from the open theist side is that they have at least 400 verses that support open theism, and these kind of verses are verses in the Bible where God says like he is gonna forget something, or that he's just not gonna see somewhere, or that he's not gonna see something, or that or that he repented from something, or that he changed his mind, and there's this kind of pattern. So I guess their argument, it's more of an inductive argument. Is like, okay, if you're a classical theist, then what's going to happen is that your position becomes very improbable, because you're going to have to put excuses at least 4,000 times. I'm sorry, 400 times in a row, and we have a consistent inductive body of data all throughout Scripture that comes out to at least 400, and that's a very good set of data. That's a good margin. So we couldn't accuse them of a hasty generalization. When you see like a sequence of I'm nice to one person, I'm nice to the second person, therefore I'll be nice to the third person. That doesn't have sufficient data, but 400 verses, that seems like wow, that's overwhelming data, and it would be. There's a massive problem with this argument, is that if it's actually true, we're going to see that it has a massive problem on Christology. Like, you're going to measure Christology, and I'll turn it around and say that even those 400 verses, like, have a even more verses that support right Christology, and I'll be showing how pretty soon. So the idea is that I call it the son with the soul argument. Again, the son with the soul argument. Why? Because Jesus is present in the Old Testament, and not all traditions believe this. Like, for example, like Roman Catholics, you see Trent Horn that argues the Trinity is not in the Old Testament. But that's I think that's a horrible claim. And people like Jay Dyer in the Eastern Orthodox Church, because Eastern Orthodox have always believed that that the Trinity is in the Old Testament, that we find Jesus, and that is actually Jesus, like actually a Christophany, where he's actually a man with actually body parts and actually having a soul, this kind of stuff. And they correctly correct the Roman Catholics on this. And I think what NR theology is doing is having the same error as the Roman Catholics. So one big proof of this is, for example, in Genesis 18, where you see that Abraham goes and prostrates before a man. So there's 3 men that come, and these men to which he prostrates to worship him. And this man is under a tree, has hands, drinks water, eats food, and this is a very important part. He says that he's gonna walk to Sodom and Gomorrah to see if what he heard. So to see if that was true. So if we actually take it literally, as he wants to take it literally, it would be those 400 verses. How would he know it's not about it is not about Jesus himself? And it's more probably Jesus, because we see that this angel of the Lord, not just in Genesis 18, it's also the same one in Judges 13, in Exodus 3, in the Garden of Eden. So it is this human Jesus that has human characteristic. It has a finger. It has described as a man, and people sometimes they don't recognize it's the angel of the Lord. They think it's just a man, and they're like, "Oh no, the angel of the Lord visited us." Like that's what happens in Judges 13, and he says it was the God that took him out of Egypt, and it's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And now in all of those 3 stories, we can find these Christophanies, these instances where it seems that Yahweh has a humanized nature of Christ. And if this is true, this makes more sense in light of Genesis 18, as I was saying. Why? Because he has to travel physically. He has to walk to Sodom and Gomorrah to know if something is true. So it's not a dynamic omniscience where you know most of the universe, but you just don't know just a few things, and what the evil thing of X and Y person were going to do. No, it seems like he didn't know. Also, like he was spatially limited, kind of like as if you have a soul, because he had a soul, and he had to travel to Sodom and Gomorrah to get to know X, Y, or Z. So if this is true, then those 400 verses of Jesus changing his mind, or Jesus forgetting something, whatever, in the Old Testament, the angel of the Lord, because we see it's most of the interactions with Israel are with the angel of the Lord, and this is consistent with
You still there? Did I lose you, buddy? Checking on my end here. Make sure I'm good. Yeah, it looks like Israel is frozen up there.
Do you hear me?
Can
you hear me?
Yeah. Hang on a second.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
1 second. Well, that's kind of weird how that's working out right now. Maybe is that going to remove
yeah,
both
what
of you?
happened is my remember what I said about the electricity that I don't have electricity, so my laptop right now. So right now I'm using my phone, and I guess this is the only option I have right now.
Gotcha.
But yeah,
And
anyways,
I would also
so
push back on those guys when they talk about when they point at things like God saying that he's repenting of a certain action, or changing his course of action or whatever. Yeah, okay, he does say that. However, God does also say things like in Isaiah that he declares the end from the beginning. And so why do we think that in the beginning, when he was making that declaration, that his repentance over a certain thing wasn't part of that declaration? Why can we say that? I think that we can say that. I think that it would be more consistent to view God as having declared the end from the beginning, right? But in time, while speaking to material beings that live in a linear timeline, namely humans, that he would speak to them in language that they can understand, right? We think that, like, how, considering his creation, considering the manner in which God created us and our brains, how are we going to expect God to come down and start talking about philosophical concepts that we cannot even wrap our mind, like his concepts, like his thoughts and his ways? He hasn't created us with the ability to understand all of his ways. And so
Yeah,
when he speaks to us, he has to use human language. We're humans. Well,
that's why he doesn't talk about metaphysics too much in the Bible, because it gets like so complicated. I mean, for example, like there's positions on computational theism where the analogy is of a programmer, and that reality is pretty much a computer program because of the reduction to information, the reduction to a 2D reality, that it's with bundle theory, mostly a composition of propositions, or a composition of information. And how do you explain that in the ancient world? So if some complicated perspective of metaphysics, where in the Bible, I mean, how would you even, like, how in the world would you explain it? And if you're talking about let's say dualism, the quantitative and quantum mechanics, and how that works, and how a fundamental particle collapses into probability, blah blah blah. How do you explain that in the Bible? So yeah, I'm not saying that the classical theist position is wrong on this. So because you seem to be representing the classical theist view on this. What I'm saying is that if I assume, like, his narrative, that we take this literally, still the exact person that would be involved in all of these 400 verses, some Catholics, not all Catholics, but some Catholics. So over here we're just assuming their position. So we're assuming that he's right, and even then, yeah, he still doesn't get to his conclusion. He's up with his conclusion. So what kind of biblical data he's left with? It wouldn't be 400 verses. It would be just a handful of verses, if any. He would have to prove that such person is not the Father, but in most instances, it is the Son. And so he doesn't have much body of data anymore, just a handful. So now he doesn't have an induction. So now he doesn't have a strong case. Now he's got a very, very, very weak case. And if he wants any theology, I know you're going to be watching this, we can debate this. We can get on stage. I got a moderator. We can do it with Donnie on Standing for Truth or other channels. We can debate this if you want. The Son with the Soul hypothesis, whether those 400 verses better explained by open theism. So yeah, that's what I'm saying. That I am assuming the other person's position, but if you're going to be a classical theist, I mean that's fine too. You just got to assume the other person's position.
yeah, and another thing that really just drives me wild about open theism is this whole idea of God not having perfect knowledge of the future. And I don't quite understand how they can support things like fulfilled prophecy with that kind of outlook, where God doesn't know the future. He is instead reacting in time, like in real time, in our current present. He is just coming, I guess, just coming across new information at every moment and making vast calculations, just, excuse me, unimaginable calculations of how to respond to those circumstances as he's coming across them, or You know, how do you
Mm.
how do you prophesy as God if you don't know the future? Do you know how they would respond to that or not?
Um, well, yeah, they would use some analogies, like in my experience, like some debates I have. I'm not saying this is the answer that all of them give, but they usually just give analogies of how you can know the future as a human, like you as a human, when it comes to some others with the libertarian free will. So, for example, if there's a meteorite coming, and you see the trajectory of the meteorite, you see the like the speed, the mass of it, and the kind of impact it can do. You can pretty much guess based on like how humans would interact, that whenever it hits, like you're gonna know they're gonna run away. You're gonna know they're gonna be scared, they're gonna be yelling, or they're gonna be either praying or this kind of stuff. So it's gonna cause like mass hysteria, and it's gonna affect the economics. The economy. It's gonna affect maybe the culture or some relations with other countries, this kind of stuff. So they try to say that the same way that we as temporal creatures can predict some stuff about other temporal creatures, even though our knowledge is not full, like God's knowledge, it's full on when it comes to all instances of external factors happening around the world. So since he would have all that knowledge about the rest of the stuff that we don't know, he would have a certain position about the future, and they would say it's just analogous to kind of like what we do. So that's usually the answer I get.
Right.
I
And so
expand a little bit,
God's
use my own argument, but I'm not saying that's solvable, but that's what some of the people I've interacted with have used with me.
so God's knowing the future and being able to prophesy is more of him performing a calculation based on current circumstances, right? Just like our calculation with the asteroid heading toward Earth, where we calculate its trajectory and angle and velocity, and using that. And we do it every day with the weather, right? We know it's going to rain today at 7 p.m. or whatever, and we're usually pretty accurate. But there
Yeah, and
is
notice
no,
how
you have to immediately jump to analogy like that, but there is no place in scripture that describes God's knowledge in that way.
And notice how we're being charitable to not just any theology, but to the other side. So I'm saying some of the people I've interacted with, but I'm not saying that all scholars, or I'm not saying that that's the only answer. And if you refute it, that's like they're done for. So notice how we got some intellectual integrity, some intellectual honesty, and we're careful to not generalize. And that's not what any theology is doing. Like he generalized on the jerk behavior. He generalized on Calvin as being a hyper-Calvinist. He generalized on the eras of history, like some being more evil than others, and try to generalize it to ours. He generalizes all the time. He doesn't have this integrity at all whatsoever.
Yeah, well, I'm not afraid to generalize a little bit, and I'm going to actually right now. And how I'm going to do that is say that it doesn't matter if it's open theism, provisionism, Arminianism, whatever you want to call it, free gracers, whatever you want to call it. They are different solutions to the question, how do we remove God's sovereignty and replace it with human autonomy? Every position that's not reformed has a different way of doing it. And they're all heading towards the same goal. And he said at the beginning of this video, he hates Calvinism, but it's not just the name Calvinism that he hates, right? What he hates specifically is the fact that God is sovereign over salvation, because if God is sovereign over salvation, that means you are not the hero of your story. You are not the catalyst for your salvation. You did not choose your destiny. You did not save yourself. You did not do the right thing. You did not make a righteous decision. If God is sovereign over salvation, then you are still a wretch saved by grace only. And that message of the Bible, of Reformed theology, is offensive to every last woman, man, and child who has ever lived on the face of planet Earth that has not had their heart changed by the message itself. I didn't say someone who chose to accept it, whether they believed it or not. And then God responded to them. Isn't that crazy, though? I had this long conversation on Veckel's channel last night about this with a free gracer, where they're affirming all the way, oh yeah, faithfulness that's a gift from God. God does everything. God saves you. It's God's faithfulness that he gives to you. And all of this. But then, which I'm like, well, great, man, you sound reformed when you're saying it like that. And so we kind of started picking his position apart. And they ultimately land on, which is all of these positions. Why I'm going here is because all of these positions ultimately land on the same thing. It's that the blood of Christ is not the actual catalyst for salvation in their systems. The blood of Christ shed is not literally the thing that saves people. What saves people in their system is making a decision, is saying that you accept it.
I'm gonna just give a little bit of pushback on my experience, like talking to non-Calvinists, some of the debates I had, and how they some of the examples I've encountered, is some of them, they too do try really hard and not focus on the glory part for themselves. Some do. So for example, like the Catholics, they have to. Why? Because they got to give glory to Mary. And they got to exclusively give glory to Mary, to her saints, to do hyperdulia, this kind of stuff. So yeah, there's some of them that do have to argue for human glory, but in some instances, some people I've encountered try to get away from this, and the way they do it is with the distinction of temporal salvific conditions, logical conditions, and causal conditions. So what we all have in common from all traditions is that we all deny causal conditions. So the way that they do try to make God all sovereign in this instance is focusing on what's called temporal conditions. So in a sense, so just defining all three first, I'll first define the one that we all agree it's false. Causal conditions would be like you light a match, you put it in another match or in dynamite, and it goes boom. So it's a direct cause and effect kind of thing that necessarily follows, and was because of the object or the properties of the object. But what they do is that in a temporal sense, it will be like let's say like a YouTuber is going to give $1,000 to every person that meets X criteria. So let's say his criteria is that that they look poor, or that they are asking for food and not use it for drugs, and that are walking by some specific streets, whatever. So when the YouTuber goes to a specific street and finds someone with such characteristics, he gives $1,000. So it's not that the homeless himself cost anything, because he never had any intention of being the one picked by the YouTuber and, being his standards. So it's not his standards. He did nothing. And sometimes even we would say he was even unaware of the whole plan of the YouTuber, but it was the YouTuber that had those standards, that had those circumstances, and that it was specifically that person that he chose that met those standards, that that accomplished those temporal conditions. So it will be as if he's going in time or moving in time and seeing those characteristics and then giving salvation to such person. So it was the action of the person or the being of that person was the case in this scenario, but he did nothing in regards to his salvation. It was all because of the YouTuber's standards and his grace to do that. Pretty much, it's kind of like the kind of arguments that I've seen most of the time.
Ask you this question, and so I think we both affirm the idea that while it's not true of what he said earlier, that God has ordered the SA to take place, or has ordered some crime to take place, or is puppeting that thing to take place, but however, he has decreed for it to take place. He is the ultimate cause as God, the person who created the universe and decreed all things. Now, if that's the case, in your mind, Israel, rather, whether you use a philosophical argument or if you have a scriptural argument off the top of your head, your mind, is it that prevents you from saying that God is evil if he has decreed evil?
Oh, okay. So you're asking for an argument of how God is not evil. Okay.
Now, why is God not evil
if that's the
he's
question? So
decreed sins?
yeah. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Okay. I got it. Yeah, so I actually made a post a while ago. I'm not sure how long ago, but on this argument that I'm going to present. So, in the first premise, we see that evil in the Bible is defined as a sin. So whichever thing is sin is deemed as evil. So it seems like it's interchangeable in a sense, which is sinful, it's evil. And we see also the definition of sin in the Bible, which is transgression of the law. So such person that would be evil would pretty much have to transgress the law. The problem is that the law had specific audiences in mind that it applies. So it doesn't apply to every agent universally, but there's categories of sin. So there's, for example, like things that a Jew might do that may not be a sin for a Gentile. There's things that a boss may do that may not be a sin for a worker. There's things that a master would do that are not a sin for a eved, and vice versa. Laws for men that are not for women, and vice versa. Laws for priests that are not for the audience, and vice versa, and so on and so forth. The problem is that we never see a thing about those laws applying to God, neither the Old Testament laws or the law of God that we see in the New Testament. We don't see that God is applying to himself any of those laws. So it's for those specific people that that can possibly make those laws. So it's impossible for God to even be in that same criteria. And there's only one way that actually I appreciate from Dr. Alan Rhoda for giving me this feedback. But is that, for example, if God says something like, if I were to lie if I were to lie, I would be immoral. So in instances where God is talking negatively about a group of people, I think it was the Israelites. It was like, no, I'm not men, so that I would lie and that I will be evil like you guys. So it kind of like it's saying that we can do a modus tollens on this and say that pretty much that if God were to lie, he would be immoral. So he does not lie like these other people, therefore he is not immoral. So in that instance, so God has a sort of like moral obligation in that sense, or if X would be the case, like he would be immoral. But the thing is, we don't find any verses of such things happening, of places where he reveals something moral about himself. We don't see any of those instances of God doing so. So pretty much the critic is left without no possible scripture to bind God to be morally accountable for so evil, because it is an exclusively unique category for those commanded. That's what transgression of the law means. That what sin means, and sin is evil. So it's bound specifically to this unique category that applies for humans.
Yeah, and on lies, I would say that God has a problem when it comes to the ability to tell a lie. He's got this little problem that is what he speaks comes to pass, right? And so God calls things that don't exist as if they do. And so you could say that that's like a lie, except it's not, because when God speaks that thing, it becomes true, right? God can't speak and it not be true, because whatever he says is just true on the virtue that he's the one who said it. You know what I mean? And so God says something that isn't true in that moment, then it is now true, right? It is now. So it's
Yeah, good point. Good point.
outside of that very philosophical argument. I would also say, and I think that you touched on this a little bit too, but I kind of want to phrase it in my own words here to say that the law of God, like you said, is a law with a specific audience. The law is for humans, right? The law is not for dogs or cows or
There's a
insects.
question I asked for one of the critics. I was like, how do you apply the period laws to God?
Right. See, God puts a law down, and he says, first he makes a creation, right? Here's the creation in my image. I'm going to put this law down, and now I'm going to promise to judge according to this law. Who did that to God? Right? Who said, God, here is a law that you are going to be held accountable to at the day of my choosing? Like,
Mhm.
if there is some kind of cosmic law that exists outside of God that he has to conform to, that he has to make sure he's within this law, then guess what? He's not God. There's another God above him who's more powerful than he is, who is setting up laws for him and who
Yeah, and
intends to judge him.
yeah, like we do not hold accountable Gentiles for not following the laws of Jews. In Judaism, they knew this. They knew they just wouldn't had their own laws for the Gentiles, but they were not obligated to keep the Torah laws, or to eat kosher or
And
this kind of stuff.
if God kills a person, has he committed murder? Has he broken his commandment that thou shalt not murder? Nope,
Oh, and
absolutely
those
not.
assume that those laws assume about murder. It means that it assumes innocence. It assumes innocence. So there cannot be possibly a murder without innocence. And the thing is, because of total depravity, or even in their own worldview, let's say because it just so happened that free creatures happen to do X, Y, or Z sin, and that's pretty much all of humanity. So despite how how improbable that is, like why is there not someone that just didn't sin out of their free will? Well, Catholics would say Mary, but anyways, so you have all these reasons of why everyone has pretty much sin, and we see these universal statements that everyone has sinned, and it's seen plainly and many times throughout the Bible. So if that is so, it is impossible for God to murder because they all have sinned. So if he were to kill someone, it would be a justified killing. So even if, let's say, X person kills Y person, even if Y was innocent in the eyes of X, so he didn't do anything to X. So, for example, that wouldn't be the same as if Y didn't do anything to God. For example, it could be a relationship where maybe he was innocent towards one such person, but not innocent towards God, and that would be all of humanity, pretty much.
And I want to push back on them a little bit on the whole idea of God and sin and all of this thing. Let's take idolatry, for example. Is there any possible way of imagining God committing idolatry? Now, I can actually imagine a way. I can imagine a way for God to commit idolatry. And do you know what that way is?
Mhm.
For God to commit idolatry, then he would put the will of man above his own will. And so I would argue that the free willers are arguing for God having committed idolatry against himself by putting the will of man above his own will.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard that argument. I personally, I don't know how to pull it off. But yeah, I've seen that argument argued a couple times. The thing is,
Well,
I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure how we get to worship from having a free will. But maybe you can unpack that a little bit for me.
Well, as far as worship goes, we are to worship in spirit and in truth. And one of the ways that we worship is by exhorting God for his will to be done, right? And so part of our showing our worship of God is conforming to his will, is praying that his will would be done in our lives, is to say things like, I'm going to do this thing tomorrow if it's the will of God, right? And so at all times, we are to be placing the will of God above our wills. Not my will, God, but your will be done. Now, in the case of decisionism, it's flip-flopped. God is saying that to us. God is saying, I desire every last person on the entire
Oh,
planet to
yeah.
come to salvation. But however, what I'm going to do is, man, your will be done. Mine, but your will be done, man. You decide your eternal destiny. You decide
There's some
salvation.
there's something interesting I remembered. Actually, one of the guys in our team, the Colin from Consistent Calvinism, he makes a cool argument from the fact that it seems that God has to submit to temporally looking into time to react to the will of men. Why? Because in their temporal conditions of salvation, or in the relationship between humans and God, they say that pretty much God has to look into time to see who is going to be humble, who is going to have faith, who is going to believe, who is going to do X, Y, and Z. So he has to do that, and then from there react. So the thing is that they kind of like flip the thing. It's instead of like us reacting to God, it's pretty much God, reacting to humans, and pretty much us being something that that moves God to do X, Y, and Z. So
Yeah, our will be
that's a little
done.
bit weird,
Right. What else do we have? Honor thy father and mother. Let's see. Does God the Father have a father or a mother? No. Did Christ have a father or a mother? Yes. Did he honor them? Yes. We have, look, this is a real way to sum this whole thing up. If it was even conceivable for God in his eternal glory to commit a sin, then he could have just lived a righteous life as God the Father for us, right? He had to step into our reality. He had to take on the likeness of human flesh for the law even to apply to him, right? He's subjecting himself to his own law in humility. Like, I did not create a law for myself. I created a law for my creation. Now I'm subjecting myself to that law by stepping into time as Christ. And Christ did not break any of those laws. And so,
And there's a thing about more responsibility, because they have to explain how is it the case that Christ is sinless. Because if Christ has everything that a human has, and they have to argue this, or unless they're going to be heretics, either in Nestorianism or Neopolitarianism or Apollinarianism, those kind of charges would apply to them if they don't distinguish. If they don't say like why is it that Jesus did not sin, and usually the things that you're gonna see is that, oh well, he's a hypostatic union, but if that's the case, then the reason why he did not sin was external to himself, and it was more in he did not sin because of God, and if he did not sin because of God, then under the own theology they say that if you are determined, then you don't have moral responsibility. So if the reason why he didn't sin was God, then he was determined not to sin, but yet he is praiseworthy for not sinning. So if he's praiseworthy for not sinning, that means that he was determined and he was praiseworthy. So there was more responsibility in determinism. That's compatibilism. So they and this is an answer that I've been getting a couple times from some of the top-notch apologists. They say, oh, because of God, because it's a hypostatic union. Well, dude, you just proved Calvinism. I'm sorry. You just did. You proved the compatibilism. So they got to come up with some other explanation. Other explanation
yeah.
I've heard is that, okay, it was not because of God, but they just bite the bullet, and some have told me, oh no, yeah, Christ could have sinned. It just so happened that
Oh,
he didn't
yeah.
sin. So it was
Yeah.
possible or probable that he could have been a sinful Messiah, but that's just gonna mess again Christology. So how did they get out of this issue without proving compatibilism or without making God a sinner? And also, it's very improbable because we have about 35,000 actions that we do any day. So you make that for a week, you make that for a month, you make that for a year, you make that for 33 years of Jesus. You come out with billions and billions and billions of choices that one makes throughout the lifetime. So if that's the case, and every single choice is as probable as other choice, it could have been 50-50 in all of them. I mean, that would be the like the biggest coincidence to ever happen in existence. It would be like the same way as if there's lotteries, and let's say I buy 5 lottery tickets and I win all 5. You wouldn't just think, well, I mean, this guy is very lucky. I mean, it's possible, right? You would say that, well, it's probably rigged. And if it's rigged, then it was because of God. And if it was because of God, then you got compatibilism, because you also have to say it's praiseworthy. So if you deny compatibilism and you say it was God, then how do you get Jesus being praiseworthy? How do you get praiseworthiness? So They got a bunch of issues there. A lot of Christological issues that they, on how they explain like how Jesus was sinless. I can go just as humble as to say that even if I can just say it's extremely improbable, and they would have to leave the fine-tuning argument, because that's how you argue for the fine-tuning argument. You say that the atheist has a possibilities like so utterly improbable that the best explanation or the most plausible or probable explanation is that God did, or an intelligent designer did X, Y, and Z. So they would have to leave the fine-tuning argument, but they love it. It's just that they're not consistent on when it comes to probabilities and how they prove Jesus was not sinless. So it's a massive problem for them.
Yeah, well, most open theists would affirm that all human beings are born in the same sinless state that Jesus was born in. They would say that that infants are born innocent, just like Jesus was born innocent. And they say, Idol Killer definitely says that if humanity has a sinful nature, then because Christ was made like us in every respect, as it says, then that would mean that he would have to have a sinful nature also. But the very text that's in question there says that he's made like us in every respect, and then there's a comma, and it says yet without sin.
Well, the thing is they cannot argue that. It's unbiblical to argue that. Why? Because the promise that we get from Paul is that he talks about all these struggles with the flesh in Romans 7, for example, among other verses, among other chapters. He talks about the issues of the flesh, how the flesh makes you do stuff that you do not want to do, how the flesh it's a curse, how it takes you to sin, how the flesh does all these things. So the promise of the new body is that whenever you resurrect in a new body. So you're the same consciousness, just with a different body. But why would you have a different body if you know that was sinless at some point? So if an infant dies and it resurrects, so is the infant gonna get a new body? So you would say that the promise of the new body wouldn't apply to infants, that it would only apply to adults, but that would be kind of weird. How do you come to that conclusion? I mean, it will be an inference, not from the text for sure. So and the body that we are promised is the perfect body of Christ, and is the perfect body of Adam and Eve, is like the body of Adam and Eve. So if those are the bodies, and that we're going to have, then our body is not the same body as Jesus, pretty much.
I don't think that I would agree, though, that Adam and Eve in the garden had the same kind of body as Jesus has in glory. I would not affirm that, because what we have in the glorified body is an immutable body. We have a body that is not capable of being affected by sin, a body that's not capable of committing sin or having it tarnish us in any way. And the body that Adam and Eve had very clearly it was not an immutable body. So I would just slightly disagree and say
that's a very good point that I've actually haven't thought about before. But the problem is that we do see this argument. I don't remember where in Scripture, but yeah, it's about the sinlessness before the fall. Referring to Adam and Eve, and that we're gonna have this body. So there's this verse. I'm just gonna try to look it up for next time, and I'll send it to you. But yeah, I would say it's a more orthodox theology to say that it is the body of Adam and Eve before the fall.
That Adam and Eve had a glorified body.
Oh yeah, and there's an answer. I'm sorry, a sinless body. A sinless body.
Yeah, definitely a sinless body. But
Yeah,
sinless
it's
does
similar,
not
but
mean
so if you
glorified.
notice, so give me 1 second. So about your question about being immutable in heaven, like incapable of sin. So there could be a distinction there. So if you notice the difference between the Adam and Eve, maybe it was not the body, maybe it was that the devil entered the garden and brought a false premise, brought a lie, something external to them, and they, as thinkers, process this information, and it affected their whole thinking. Now, having this false idea comes up into their actions too. So the difference is that from agents that are going to get the new body is that we already know about those lies of Satan. Why? Because that's what we're doing over here on earth. We're struggling with lots of lies around the world. So over there, let's say we could say that maybe Satan is not going to tempt us anymore, or Satan, or there's not going to be anyone present to try to tempt us.
And you have,
And there's no way
hang on
to
one
introduce
second.
a false premise into our system, pretty much into our mind.
Have you considered this though? Have you considered the idea that prior to the fall, neither Adam nor Eve had any knowledge of good or evil? And a glorified body not only retains the knowledge of good and evil that was brought through sin, but it adds the glorification brought through Christ's resurrection.
Yeah, but
You
they
know,
had
and so I would say that
glorification.
because if you are in a glorified body, you're immutable to sin now. I mean, sin has no effect on you now, like death has no effect on you. And so I would say rather that Jesus, Adam, and Eve, uh, they can't even be similar before Jesus dies and resurrects, because Jesus is born with a knowledge of good and evil, while Adam and Eve are not.
There's a big issue there, brother, because we actually see Christophanies in the Garden of Eden. So there's a passage where it says that there was a voice walking towards Adam and Eve. So a voice
Okay.
walking, so it had feet, and that voice walking, it was God. So God was in the Garden of Eden, and so it was Christ. He had a body to walk, and it was at His image that Adam and Eve were made. They were made in His image, and so yeah. In this sense, they did have Christ. And if you notice what salvation is, in a sense, so all Christian traditions affirm, in some sense, the doctrine of theosis. So Eastern Orthodox call it theosis. The Roman Catholics call it divinization, and some Protestants historically have called it Christification. There's a couple names out there, but the idea is that the process of regeneration is that we get when we get the new heart, that is the heart of Christ. So we are born again because we don't have the heart of stone anymore, and now we get the heart of Christ within us. So in this sense, we would say that we become like Christ, and that's what happens in progressive sanctification. We start becoming more like Christ, more and more, at least in our thinking. And what happens in the
But
when
not
we are
like Adam
resurrected?
and Eve, though. We're not becoming more like Adam and
Yeah,
Eve, who
but
knew
what if
no
they
good
but
or evil.
but if they have Christification? Why? Because they were in communion with God. They were saved. They were within the covenant.
So they lost
So
their
they were saved. And
salvation?
if
Is
they
that what
were
you're
no
saying, that
no no
there was no
no
preservation of the saints for Adam and Eve?
No, I think they were saved the whole time, but the issue here is that they were Christified. They underwent the process of Christification, or they were born with Christification. They were born saved. They were born with the image of Christ. They were born with the new heart. They were born
I think you're getting into a
with a
lot of
redemption.
speculation on that topic. I think that you're speculating an awful lot on that. Maybe you're not creating the speculation. Maybe you got that information from elsewhere and you're not actively speculating on it. But I just I don't see any scriptural reason to say that Adam and Eve in their original body is like Christ's glorified body. I would say rather that when they resurrected, they received a glorified body that was like Christ's new body. That they, you know, that they didn't receive back the original body that they had in the garden. They would have received a new one like the one that Christ took on at resurrection. And as far as the appearing of Christ in the garden, I absolutely 100% agree. Though I have a theory on that you might find interesting, and we might wrap it up with this because I gotta do some stuff. But okay, so we see in Isaiah 57:15, God inhabits eternity. This is something I talked about recently on a community post. Now, what that means for God to inhabit eternity, that could be part of my speculation on my part. Could be. But I see inhabiting eternity as God living, experiencing, being active in all moments of time simultaneously. As in, there's never a moment of time that God is not present at all times, right?
No,
So
we
he's
agree. We agree.
okay. And so if that's the case, that's the kind of glory that God has, then that would be, and this is getting away from the topic we were just having, by the way. If that's the case, then that's the kind of glory that Christ, the Son of God, emptied himself of from Philippians chapter 2. He would have emptied himself of that eternal inhabitation and having the timeless experience of all things simultaneously. He emptied himself of that in Philippians chapter 2. But in John 17, he asks, glorify me together with yourself with the same glory I had with you before the world was. And so if he takes back the same exact kind of glory, and if we can agree that an inhabiting eternity means what we just explained it to mean, then in Ephesians 4:10, when it said of Christ that he, on his ascension, he doesn't just ascend to heaven and just say, okay, here I am in heaven. No, he ascends to a place that is far above all the heavens, is what it says. And that makes me think he's definitely ascended back to that high, lofty realm that is referred to as inhabiting eternity. And so I think that, yes, Christ was walking in the garden with Adam and Eve, but it's post-ascension Christ. I think that post-ascension Christ was walking in the garden with Adam and Eve. That's just a theory. There's a little bit of speculation involved with that. I realize I'm not here to just like teach that doctrinally or anything, but it's just a theory I'm working on since we kind of brushed on
What do you
that
mean by
topic.
post-ascension? What do you mean by
Post-ascension, as in Christ is born as a baby, he lives his life, he dies on the cross, he's buried, he resurrects, then he ascends. When he ascends and receives his glorification, he receives that same inhabiting eternity glorification. So he ascends to the eternal realm, and now he has access to all of time in his human body. And so I think that
I have my own
literally,
hypothesis on that, but it's yeah, I would say it's a little bit different, but yeah, it's going to take a while. But what I will say is that we see in when we see in John 8, when Jesus is talking to the Pharisees, and they say that Abraham is their father, and Jesus tells them, if Abraham was your father, you guys wouldn't have tried to kill me, like Abraham did not try to kill me. So pretty much, so you gotta ask the question, what is this about? When did Abraham try to kill Jesus? And if it's the Jesus that they try to kill, like it will be the same Abraham. I'm sorry, the same Jesus that Abraham saw. So that Jesus they're seeing is the same Jesus they saw before. But when was that? It was at Genesis 18 or in 19 when the guys in Sodom and Gomorrah tried to kill the angels, and one of them was the angel of the Lord, and that'll be the only instance when someone tries to kill Jesus, and when Abraham is present. And if we see in Genesis 18, as I was saying, Abraham recognized it as a man. Like he gave him food, he washed his feet, he was under a tree, he walked to Sodom and Gomorrah to see if what he heard was actually true. So you see a case in which it is a human, and this human must have been recognizable as of his face, as of his body, as of his accidental predicates, in the same manner that of what the Pharisees are seeing. Why? Because they didn't try to kill him. Abraham didn't try to kill him. They're trying to kill him, and he's saying that if he were to be seen by Abraham, Abraham would not try to kill him in the state that he is in John 8. So it must be the same Jesus. It must be looking the same as the one on Genesis 18.
Yeah, very interesting. I think that we could talk about that for a little while. And again, guys, we're not I don't want you to think that we're like teaching this as doctrine. Like we're two guys just speculating on this right now, you know. So just wanted to point that out. And I appreciate you coming on and discussing these things with me. Let me I'm working on getting a link real quick though. Hang on one second. Guys, we're fixing to wrap it up here. I wanted to put this link in case you think that this hoodie looks cool. I got a new hoodie on my merchandise list here. I don't really push that very much, but I'm just going to. So there's a link you can click on to go view. I've got a few t-shirts, and that's the coolest thing, I think. This one here, I think that's the coolest one. But there's another hoodie too that's more simple than that and cheaper. There's a few shirts. You guys need some winter wear, that out. And again, Israel, I really appreciate you being here, man. And I really like what somebody said. Who said that just now? Salty apologist. It's relevant. He said something like, "I really love it how Reformed people," or he said, "I love how Reformed folks will actually talk through their disagreements and bring it to the text and not just accept whatever the other person says as long as it's anti-reformed." I love that too. I absolutely 100% agree with his sentiment on that. I love how that we could disagree on a simple thing, and we don't hate each other now. You know, like we are just kind of Reformed people do disagree on various
we
things.
just move on or live it for later or argue or listen to each other or just go through some of the data and nothing happens. I mean it's just normal. It's just normal theology stuff. But no, man, I really appreciate you too. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's an honor to be on your side in this battle on soteriology online. This battle with the people that do not have a shred of intellectual honesty on representing the other side properly. So yeah, man, it's great to be on the same side, and we'll be here on YouTube more actively, and we'll hopefully we can collaborate in the future. And it's an honor to be here, man. Really like your work, really like some of the debates you've done, some of the chats you've done, and I really appreciate you, man.
All right, man. Well, hey guys, that's going to wrap up this program of Rogue Calvinist Radio. We'll get into something maybe even tonight. I might even hop back on here tonight. But for now, that's going to be it. I'm going to go ahead and end the stream. And everyone have a good day. Grace and peace.